You're listening to episode 157 of Mitolife Radio. I'm Matt Blackburn, your host, and today we have Dr. Scott Sherr returning to the show. I actually forgot about this episode, even though it was an awesome one with moving from Colorado back to Idaho. So we would have had an episode released last Friday if I remembered. But it's all good. I'm getting settled in here, back with the goats, the chickens, the bees, and record snow. I've been getting the tractor stuck and having a lot of fun trying to figure out how to make this place manageable and able to get in and out. It's funny, living in Southern California for 30 years, I really took that weather for granted. And when you move to a snowy climate, you realize that there's a lot more to juggle. And I love it because it just adds another layer of fun complexity to life. It's been putting my time management skills to the test, which is fun. And it's a meditation to get out there and plow the snow or lift it and dump it. I highly recommend it if you ever have the chance. I bring all that up because Dr. Scott Sherr is actually based out of Boulder, Colorado. And I was just living over there a week ago. And fortunately, his house survived those fires that burned down over 600 homes. So that actually happened shortly after we recorded this show. So pretty wild times. When stuff like that happens, it just makes you really appreciate life more. And I'm really glad to be back off grid and back to a wood-burning stove where I can heat my chaga tea on there, my bone broth, keep my steak plate warm, heat the entire house. There's so many uses for a wood stove, and they're, to me, a million times better than gas. So enough ranting. Dr. Scott Sherr is involved in something called health optimization medicine, and he's also the COO of the company called Troscriptions that has 3 products now. They have 2 methylene blue products. Their first one is blue cannatine, which is kind of a speedball mixture of methylene blue, caffeine, nicotine, and hemp extract / CBD. And then after that, they came out with a product called Just Blue, which I actually like a lot. And that's just methylene blue. That's the only active ingredient in that one. So you could take it anytime, right before bed, whenever you want. And their latest product is called Troche. And that's a really awesome product. I recommend keeping that in your car. If you're having a frustrated day, you can take the edge off a little bit with one of those. And it's a mix of kava, nicotinyl GABA, which is GABA bound to vitamin B3, and CBD and CBG. And I've only ever taken a quarter of a troche, as they call it. So all of their products come in these squares that you can break up and choose your dose, whether it's a quarter, a half, 3/4, or a whole square. I usually just do a quarter of all of their products, and that's enough for me. I always feel them. So with the current world events, the past few years, everyone's looking for solutions. And of course, we have the AI bots censoring everyone on social media. It's happened to me for the last 6 months or so. It's really getting wild. We're having to speak in code. But I'm putting as much information out there as I can on this blue substance called methylene blue. I'm still surprised that a lot of people have not heard of it. It's the original ivermectin, as Morley Robbins said on a previous show. It's what ivermectin is derived from, and it has way more benefits than ivermectin. This is not medical advice. I'm, of course, not making claims for any product, including Troscriptions. I'm just saying, read the book by Mark Sloan, The Ultimate Guide to Methylene Blue. Look up the research on it. It's very effective, very anti-pathogenic for all sorts of things. And if anything, it's a powerful nootropic. So Scott Sherr's ways to use it, how he uses it before flying, how to use it in combination with hyperbaric oxygen therapy, where it concentrates in the body, its effect on the brain, and much more. So enjoy. Here is Dr. Scott Sherr. All right, Scott Sherr, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure, man. In the same state.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. We're pretty close. We should have done this in person.
Next time. Yeah. Nice to see you again, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you too. Our first interview, I think it was last year or earlier this year, we talked about hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Mm-hmm. And since then I've learned a lot and kind of refined my view and perspective on it, and kind of have a better understanding on how it works. Yeah. And I think that was one of the first videos I saw from you was on YouTube talking about hyperbaric oxygen therapy. But your work is pretty broad, right? In the integrated medicine space, you integrate a lot of different things, like we're going to talk about in this interview, methylene blue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always been kind of crazy, and that's not. I always blame my father. Actually, he's a chiropractor in New York, and so he was always on the edge, and like the original alternative medicine practitioners were chiropractors, and so he still is. He has a practice in New York on Long Island, and he sees lots of different patients for many different conditions, not just your usual sort of crack your back, crack your neck kind of stuff, and always being interested in new technologies and new supplements and new therapies. And I guess that just got sort of diffused into me. And so I went to medical school thinking that I would probably be doing something more out of the box than just being a regular internal medicine physician. And I sort of graduated with the inclination that I was going to go into the hyperbaric field after doing some research and having some experience in medical school in that capacity. And I moved out to California initially and became a medical director of a hyperbaric facility out there. And then I kind of my dive into hyperbaric medicine, no pun intended, because we call them dives, but also into the world of integrative medicine kind of came from that sort of nidus, let's call it. I got involved in the biohacking space through some of the people that are well known inside that world, understanding that this particular technology, hyperbaric therapy, was a very universal technology. It was foundational for a lot of things. And then I also understood that it was not just about getting into a chamber. It was really understanding foundational health principles and understanding why people didn't do well in the chamber, why people did do well, and how you could kind of optimize people before, during, and after to make their experience as best as you could, as optimal as we could for those outcomes that people wanted. And that's kind of what gravitated me towards kind of a data-driven, way of looking at health and looking at how you can test for things like hormones and vitamins and minerals and nutrients. And so I got involved with a colleague. His name is Dr. Ted Atracoso, and Ted is one of those kind of brilliant people that you meet and you don't forget ever. And he had created a practice in Manila where he was based on principles that were similar in some ways to functional medicine, but different in the capacity of looking at things from a health perspective. We think of functional medicine as root cause illness kinds of things. And in health optimization medicine, he developed something called root cause health. How can you kind of get to the roots of your health and optimize from that framework? And so Health Optimization Medicine and Practice was born, which is a nonprofit educational company that's training doctors and practitioners on how to practice health. It's got 7 major pillars, and these pillars will be pretty familiar to a lot of your audience. The first one would be metabolomics, which is the study of metabolites or cellular processes and understanding how all those are working in real time. Looking at the gut, of course, most of us have guts that are toxic from environmental exposures and from the foods that we eat or we don't eat, or that we like to eat, or that we're addicted to, or anything in between. And then there's also the bioenergetics. This is the mitochondria and how the mitochondria work with light, water, magnetism, and all those kinds of things. The study of exposomics, which is the study of toxins in our environment, everything from the perfumes and makeups that we put on, to the foods that we eat, to the water and the air that we breathe, the water that we drink. Of course, not breathing. It's not a good idea. And also we have epigenetics, which is the study of how our environment changes our DNA and expression, and chronobiology, the study of circadian rhythms, how we sleep, other types of rhythms as well, including rhythms that come in, are called infraradian, and others that are not just cyclic in 24-hour cycles, but that are longer than and shorter, but especially circadian rhythms. And I know you're a big proponent of understanding sleep and how to optimize that, Matt. And what am I forgetting? Evolutionary biology, the idea that our body is evolved in various ways to interact with the world. In fact, our immune system was developed so that we could tell self versus non-self. And that's the first way that our immune system started developing and actually went and grew and evolved from there. But also the evolution of our culture and how our bodies are primed depending on where we grew up, our ancestors grew up. If you're Anglo-Saxon, if you're Northern Latitude, if you're African, you're obviously going to interact with the world in a very different way. And your mitochondria are going to work very differently depending on your ancestry as well. So you have all those basic tenets or modules that we use in health optimization medicine. And so the practitioner learns how to use all of these in a cohesive and comprehensive context to learn how to deal and optimize and work with the client in front of them. So it's all clinically based. And so that's the framework that I use in my own practice now. On the hyperbaric side, I think of hyperbaric therapy as this fantastic optimizer, synergizer, accelerator of healing. But you can't, and I know you and I have spoken about this before, Matt, you can't just go into the chamber and think that the world is going to be perfect and that you're just going to come out a new person. In fact, a lot of people don't, especially if they're toxic and inflamed and all the other things that we talk about that really compromise health. And so as a corollary to health optimization medicine and practice, we developed a for-profit company called Smarter, Not Harder. It's a great name. We all want to work smarter and not harder, right? Dr. Ted likes to say something. I'm not sure if he came up with this or not. He likes to say, if you want to work hard for your money, then you will. The idea is that if you create the framework that you're going to work hard for something, then you're going to work hard for something. But if it's easy, if it flows, you can work smarter and not harder potentially. So that's what Smarter, Not Harder is all about. And so what we've developed is a line of products that kind of address the bottlenecks that we find in health optimization medicine and health in general. And the first few that we developed were based on brain function, nootropic function, and mitochondrial health. And so that's where the methylene blue portion of things come in. But I'll stop talking.
No, that was really great. Yeah, I love those 7 pillars. I think most people that are sick don't even know about one of them, right? And it's like probably 80-90% of people on the planet, which is pretty incredible. And yeah, the Smarter, Not Harder, I love that. That's the story of my life. I remember being in school and almost failing a math class in high school and just being so frustrated, like, why can't I memorize things? Why do I have this brain fog? Like, I was aware of my brain fog and it was kind of frustrating and depressing. And so I set off on this mission to like get my brain functioning better. And I knew it was possible. And the more I did that, the easier it was to be successful monetarily while helping people. And it was really cool to see that process happen in my life. And I've seen that in many other people's lives as well, where you don't need to, I used to demo coconut water at Costco and just exhausting work. So
wow, that must have been exhausting. But getting, you hit on a really important point, Matt, is that you need to get your house in order first, in the sense that it's really difficult to help others. You can take them on a journey with you as you have, but it's really difficult to help others and to be the person that you want to be if you're not also working on yourself. And that's, psychosocially, emotionally, mentally, physically, biochemistry, all that together. And we often get ahead of ourselves, especially those of us that have these, let's call them genes in quotes, that like to help others and don't think of ourselves before others. And I don't want to make it's a fine line. We're not talking about not thinking of others and not feeling for others. But if you don't work on your own house, don't you work on your own architecture inside and out, it's really difficult to be as helpful and as therapeutic and as, I think, impactful as you can. And so it's only been part of my journey as well. I didn't realize all of similar things to you when I was younger. But I was lucky in a lot of ways because I had a father that was a chiropractor, can always kind of put me back together somehow. So, and dairy and other things weren't part of my life when I was a kid, which is unusual for most people. So, but it's important to always keep it in context, right? And that's what I've always tried to do with my clients, is that it's important to have a comprehensive context too, and not just think that one magic bullet exists. Maybe methylene blue. Maybe that's your only magic bullet. No, I'm just kidding.
So you're saying the magic bullet might be methylene blue?
Well, a little bit tongue in cheek, but at the same time, it's a fantastic compound, really. And the more I've delved into the research on this particular compound from a clinical perspective and also from a consumer-based perspective, right? Because we have a company called Troscriptions that makes pharmaceutical grade methylene blue into 2 of our products. But also on the clinical side, just the amount of information and the amount of data on this particular compound is pretty amazing. I mean, methylene blue was actually the first drug registered with the FDA back in the 1890s. And so it has a long history. First started off in the textile world as a stain and a dye for your blue jeans, if you still wear those. So, and it was found out, I'm not even sure how, maybe they were on drugs, I have no idea, but they figured out that this particular compound actually worked against malaria. And so it was used at higher doses to treat malaria before there were any other drugs to treat malaria. And actually, full circle, it's coming back as a drug now for malaria because most of the drugs that we use for it are now resistant to the particular antibiotics and anti-protozoan drugs that have been used for it over the last 50 or 60 years. And methylene blue also, before antibiotics and antifungals were around, was used as an antibiotic and an antifungal. And it was actually very common for, up until World War II, for methylene blue to be used prophylactically to prevent things like trench foot and others inside like the Pacific Theater during World War II. And so it was actually a common refrain. I forget, there was a song that, of course, all the military guys always have their songs for everything. But there was a song about pissing blue, because what methylene blue does is it concentrates in the urine after you ingest it, no matter how you ingest it. And so oftentimes you'll see that your urine turns blue, or it turns green, or it turns like light green or light blue, depending on the color of your urine and how hydrated you are. If you've taken B vitamins and you combine it with methylene blue, it's like a neon green. That's my favorite of the blue colors. But methylene blue started off that way. It started off as an antibiotic, an antifungal. Even there were some inclinations that was an antiviral at the time. And then as antibiotics and antivirals and antifungals came along in the 1950s, it kind of went by the wayside. It was also noted, though, at that time that certain derivations of the drug were actually very therapeutic from an antipsychotic perspective, interestingly enough. Because methylene blue also has what's called MAOI capability. It actually is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. What that means is that it prevents certain neurotransmitters from being re-upped, or the reuptake of certain neurotransmitters in the brain, especially serotonin and dopamine, but especially serotonin. And so it was used in derivations of it for antipsychotic drug derivations. In fact, the first drug that was used, called Thorazine, for psychosis, was derived from methylene blue, interestingly enough. And so it was also used as a chemical stain, and it was used in laboratory analysis for many years. And it still is, because where does the methylene blue actually concentrate? And this is interesting. It concentrates in the mitochondria. And that's what set off the whole track of understanding methylene blue, not as only a stain for the mitochondria, but what is actually happening with methylene blue inside the mitochondria to make it stain there. And so, interestingly enough, the methylene blue works in many ways to actually improve energy production. And it does it in a couple different ways, specifically on the mitochondrial, the electron transport chain. One is on cytochrome oxidase. It actually helps cytochrome oxidase move faster or work faster so that it can churn out more ATP. In addition, it also works as an electron sink. So it actually is reduced by the electrons. So the electrons go through the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. Those electrons are doing that. While they're doing that, energy is being produced, but they need to have a final electron acceptor. Now, typically that electron acceptor is oxygen, but methylene blue can do the same thing. So it actually can be just like oxygen in your cells and work in the same way so that you can continue to produce oxygen if you don't have, produce energy, if you don't have oxygen available. That's extremely huge, right? If you have an extra supply of energy producing molecules or energy capability because you have methylene blue at the cellular level to help you. Also, methylene blue seems to change the conformation of hemoglobin on the red blood cells themselves. So what that means is that it actually allows more oxygen to get dumped into tissue as you need more oxygen to make more energy. So it's helping on that side of things, along with on the mitochondrial side as well. So in addition to that, it actually helps with the production of NAD plus in the mitochondria as well. And NAD plus is very important for us to be able to make energy at the same time as the other processes that I've described. So as a result of all the data that methylene blue can work at the mitochondrial level to make energy more effectively, you've had a number of different studies over the last 10 or 20 years that have shown the potential of this particular compound, methylene blue, to help with lots of different things that can present globally as a result of mitochondrial dysfunction. And that could be anything from studies in Alzheimer's, studies in mild cognitive impairment, in looking at various other processes that are causing mitochondrial dysfunction as well, including infection.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I'm slowly getting through this book called The Ultimate Guide to Methylene Blue. I think it's Mark Sloan is the author, and it's interesting because he comes from a Ray Peat perspective. So there's a lot of talk about nitric oxide and serotonin being bad, and I don't think anything's bad. I don't think he's insinuating that they have their purpose, but how methylene blue helps to balance excess NO, excess serotonin. And one thing I wanted to bring up to you is the copper thing, because I think I had mentioned this to you maybe a month or two ago, and you mentioned CCO and cytochrome C oxidase. It's my understanding is copper dependent, and a lot of the respiratory proteins in the mitochondria are. And Morley Robbins on my show, he's obsessed with ceruloplasmin, which is like active copper essentially. And he said he thinks methylene blue is working by polishing ceruloplasmin basically throughout your body, like polishing the copper enzymes, because ceruloplasmin is actually a blue protein. So it's fascinating. Like it's needed to chop up oxygen. And so we can use oxygen. So it's so interesting. There's so many things going on. Right?
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly something about the blue pigment as well. And we also think that there's something related to blue light exposure as well. So sunlight as an activator of methylene blue. Now, we don't know for sure, but we do know that there have been some studies looking at the combination of methylene blue, certain spectrums of light, including UVC, for example, and certain types of viruses, and how that combination seems to be more effective when you add the light in there. So there's some thought that the pigment itself does have a particular usage, right, or a particular mechanism that's making it more effective at the cellular level. So certainly copper is extremely important for the mitochondrial, for the respiratory chain, for electron transport chain, and certainly for cytochrome oxidase. So it's absolutely possible. I don't know the evidence from a biochemistry perspective, but I do know that, like I was discussing before, the nice thing about methylene blue is that it supports the system. If you don't have enough oxygen around, it's going to help you make more energy. Despite that, if you have inflammation as well, one thing I didn't mention is that it's also an antioxidant. So it helps with not only accepting an electron from the mitochondria, from the electron transport chain, but also helping with any other oxidative molecules that are floating around in the cellular matrix. So that is also important, because a lot of people that have chronic inflammation have lots of chronic oxidative stress, and they don't have antioxidant capacity. And so as a result of that, it's very, it's in balance where the body is more on the inflammatory side. So methylene blue can help there. So it's extremely supportive, but at the same time, it also is going to require additional aspects of the cellular process to work most effectively, right? So if you're copper deficient, if you're mineral deficient in general, it's also going to be more difficult to make more energy, even if you give this electron receptor, the methylene blue, to the system. But I haven't seen too many issues with that, to be honest. I have seen people that have chronic inflammation, that have chronic infection, that are just looking for mitochondrial benefit, really benefit from the methylene blue itself, without dialing in that extremely well, at least in the beginning.
That's interesting. Yeah, I want to touch on the light thing, but first, since we've been talking about oxygen a little bit, recently the Troscriptions social media page posted about flying in an airplane, and I know a lot of people, including myself, are going to be traveling for Christmas, and it was basically that your oxygen, was it the ambient oxygen goes down when you're in an airplane? Everything.
Yeah, I'm happy to explain that because it dovetails on the hyperbaric side too, of course. But the idea is that when you're on an airplane, the cabin itself is pressurized. We all know that. But the pressurization is not back to sea level at 21%. And the reason 21% oxygen. And because the reason for that is that because it's too heavy. Planes are too heavy if they're pressurized to sea level. So what they instead do is they pressurize to about 8,000 feet above sea level. Or they pressurize to 6,000 feet above sea level if you're on one of the newer planes, the Dreamliners. And so, Matt, you and I are at altitude. So I think you said you're about 8,000 feet up already, right?
Like 9,000, a little over 9.
Wow, yeah. And so I'm about 5,000 feet here, where I live in Colorado too, here in the Boulder area. So, but in general, to make it easy, if you're at sea level, there's 21% oxygen in the air that you're breathing. At 8,000 feet, it's about 15.5%. Okay. So you're going down from 21% to about 15.5% oxygen, and anything else in between. So if you're at 6,000 feet, right, so you're going to be about 16.5% oxygen, just to kind of give a sense. And so the reason why the Dreamliners came out and pressurized at 6,000 feet as opposed to 8,000 feet is that because it decreases jet lag. And why? Because if you're used to being at 21% oxygen and all of a sudden you're at 15% oxygen, your body is under hypoxic conditions. You have low oxygen. You don't have enough oxygen around to potentially meet your needs. Even though you're sitting and you're not moving and you're not exercising, your body's still used to a certain amount of oxygen. So Matt, you and I are at a bit of an advantage when we fly because we are always at lesser oxygen in the air. And then we have certain mechanisms in our body that are created. And basically we increase the number of red blood cells in circulation as a result of being at altitude to compensate, because typically we carry oxygen on red blood cells, and red blood cells can increase in number when we are at altitude, and that helps us carry more oxygen per minute of blood that's being passed through your heart. The hormone that's responsible for that is something called epogen, or EPO for short. This is the drug that you'll hear that cyclists and other performance athletes will take to increase their oxygen carrying capacity so that they can perform at a higher capacity for a longer period of time. So back to flying. So when you're on an airplane, you're all of a sudden now at 15.5% oxygen. Your body goes into an inflammatory state to some degree because you don't have enough oxygen floating around to really maintain the same level of physiologic processing that you just did before you got on an airplane. And so that's the reason why you have a higher risk of jet lag, you have a higher risk of infection, just higher risk of feeling like shit when you get off the plane. Now, notwithstanding, of course, changing time zones and all of that, and what that does to your microbiome and your microbiome and all those things. But in general, it's a huge piece. So what you can potentially do is help with energy production on the cellular level, despite there not being as much oxygen around. And that's by considering the use of methylene blue for your flights, for flying on planes. And so now we don't have any studies on this per se, but we do know it's a mitochondrial optimizer. We do know it helps with energy production. We do know it's an antioxidant and all the things that we are using it for at Troscriptions. And so as a result of that, we have had a lot of anecdotal evidence of people going on planes and feeling significantly better when they get to their destination, or even when they're on the plane. So obviously you want to do it, you want to have it when you're on the plane, because that's when you're going to need the oxygen the most. And so oftentimes if I'm going to use it, I'll have one before I get on the plane, about 15 or 20 minutes beforehand. And then maybe I'll do another one when I'm on the plane as well, depending on how long the flight's going to be. But I've seen a significant difference, and in the ways that we've tested has mostly been subjective so far. We haven't looked at objective measures, and it's a little bit difficult to do that when it comes to jet lag. But now, of course, you can combine it with other things. You want to keep hydrated on the plane. You want to kind of work on your circadian rhythms if you have a long flight. And it's not just about, again, one thing that's going to work, but it's about the combination of things that you're doing at the same time. Have you played around with methylene blue on the plane yet, Matt?
Yeah, I think a few times, and I definitely felt it. And I'm decked out in the silver embedded EMF blocking clothing, and
right.
I'm doing a lot, maybe sticking red light up my nostril. I'm doing a lot of other things, but yeah, I definitely felt a difference. And I wanted to ask Scott, when you said you take one, do you mean a quarter of a troche? Because the Troscriptions is broken into, or each one is 16 milligrams, right? And then you kind of cut that into
Correct.
fourths, and then each one's 4 milligrams. So when you say take one, did you mean like 4 milligrams or?
Yeah, that's a good question. Just really quickly on the troche thing. So we make these things called troches, which are these buccal lozenges. They're squares, and they're broken up. You can break them up into fourths, each of them. And what you do is you don't typically swallow them. You let them dissolve in your mouth between your cheek and your gums. It takes about 15 to 30 minutes to be able to do that, typically. But what's nice about having a buccal delivery system is that it gets directly into the circulation of your brain, and it doesn't have to get digested in your liver, because everything that goes through our gut into our stomach and our small intestines has to get passed through the liver circulation, which can potentially do one of three things. It can make it more potent, less potent, or have no change in potency. Now, the good thing about methylene blue actually is it's pretty damn bioavailable. So it still actually stays pretty well intact even if you swallow it. However, it's going to be faster acting and a little bit more bioavailable if you take it in the oral cavity. And especially if you're looking for brain optimization for mitochondrial health in your brain, it's really nice to have it in the buccal delivery system. So we have one of our troches is called Just Blue, and that's our 16 milligram pharmaceutical grade methylene blue troche. And that troche is potentially broken up into fourths, like you're talking about, Matt. And so it really depends on the person, is what I've found. And so oftentimes for daily use, something like a quarter to a half is pretty common for most people. But if you're going to be potentially going from one place to another, and the other one is a stress, for me, I will often take more at that time. So sometimes it'll be a half, sometimes it'll be a full troche personally. But everybody kind of has to feel that out as far as what their best dose is. From like a daily health optimization, mitochondrial support perspective, a quarter or a half is most common for most of the people that use the troches. But it depends. For me, I'll take a half or a full, depending on the length of my flight and how stressed I am going into before and after, right? Am I going to a stressful location? Am I going to am I going to be staying at elevation, or am I going to be going back down to sea level? And it kind of depends on all those kinds of things for me. So the answer is that it depends. And that's the beautiful thing about our dosing in general, is that these troches, so I come from the clinical side, and we use troches in clinical practice all the time for this reason exactly, because you can make it a higher strength, like a 16 milligram methylene blue troche, but then you can break it up into quarters as needed, depending on what your needs are. And depending on what your sensitivities are as well. I have some people that take a quarter of Just Blue and they feel fantastic, energized, and they don't need any more than that. And others need a half a troche, others need a full troche to feel the benefits. And part of it is somewhat diagnostic, as you can imagine, in the sense that on the one hand, if you're feeling really well optimized after a quarter, that usually means that your mitochondria are working really well and you're just giving it a little bit of extra support to help you. If you need more, it could be that you just need a little bit more help on the cellular level to really to be able to benefit from a lower dose. And that and that does happen. And then on the other end of the spectrum, which is interesting as well, if you start feeling like crap after taking a quarter of a methylene blue troche, that's often what's happening is that you're having a detox reaction of some sort. Typically, that means that you're pretty highly inflamed, or you have some sort of deficiencies on the cellular level that's making it so that what the methylene blue is actually doing is trying to mop up oxidative stress. And when that's happening, you're going to detox from that. So it's a bit diagnostic, and it's always interesting when we get these questions online, and I get these in my practice too. I took this, I felt like shit, and I said, well, that's actually good news because we can do something about this. And so it's diagnostic on the positive or on the negative side, potentially, as a potential way of understanding that you have some work to do on the cellular level.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love your products. I've tried the liquid ones, and if you get on your clothes or on your kitchen counter, it's like a permanent stain because, like you said,
yes,
it's a dye. Yeah. So I really like the solid form. I've been playing with just taking them orally. I know a lot of people like either they might not like the taste, or it like might numb the roof of their mouth. I've had that happen with friends and loved ones, and I found that pretty similar effect just swallowing it whole. And I've been playing around with that, and I do want to experiment with taking more than a quarter at a time.
Again, titrate up. That's the idea. Is you start low and you go slow, and that's what I recommend for most people is to start off with a quarter or a half. But you make some good points. So the one that we hear a lot also is the numbness, and that's not because of the methylene blue itself. It's because of the peppermint that's in the formula to help with the taste. Methylene blue tastes like crap. It's really not a good tasting compound. And so we developed the troche specifically so that people could use it into that brain circulation that I was describing. So you get that brain hit. And the other one that we have, blue cannatine, is the one that has nicotine and caffeine in it. That's a stimulant. And that is a fantastic brain hit for productivity and for focus. And again, that's why it's really important that's in the buccal cavity, because it gives you that immediate release and you don't have to be digested and all that. But as I was saying, it's certainly true that methylene blue is highly bioavailable so that it doesn't get inactivated in the liver when it's digested. So I do have a lot of people that do swallow the troches, and they have a significant improvement, effect, feel good, all that. And I'm totally okay with that. As a company, we're totally okay with that too. The only difference is it's not going to give you as much of a brain focused mitochondrial optimization strategy. It's still going to get to the brain, and because it's going to go where the most mitochondria are, interestingly enough. So where you have the most mitochondria is where the methylene blue is going to preferentially go. So that includes your brain, your heart, your liver, and actually the place where you have the most mitochondria are your muscles. But you don't typically, so you may not be using them when you're taking your methylene blue, but we do have endurance athletes and others in that space that are starting to use methylene blue for that potential synergy, which is, again, what's happening when you're doing endurance work. You're using a lot of oxygen. So how much oxygen do you have available? You only have a certain amount. And then you start getting lactic acid production, which is that burning in your muscles. And although there might be some benefit to some burning, obviously too much is going to make you stop running. So we're wondering, and I'm just starting to test this with some of my athletes now that I work with on a clinical side, is whether methylene blue can help them from an endurance perspective as a result of that. Because again, we know that methylene blue concentrates in the mitochondria. And so can we use that from an endurance perspective if we know that muscles have a huge amount of mitochondria to continue to maintain energy production per cell?
Wow, that's really cool. And jumping back to light, you mentioned UVC. I know most people use red light in combination with methylene blue. Do you think is one better than the other? Like full spectrum light the best? Or
it's a good question. What I was referring to with the UVC before, so around 220 nanometers in length. So UVC is pretty low on the spectrum there. UVC is toxic to some degree under most circumstances. There's some in the sunlight, but we do use UVC for its antiviral capabilities. Okay, so it's very interesting. In the beginning of the pandemic, I have a friend of mine who works in the light business. In fact, he invented the LED. And so they actually developed a UVC light, 222 nanometers, that's clinically been studied that's non-toxic for humans to be used in various places around the world, including Air Force One, to help with viral particles in the air. Okay, very interesting stuff. So UVC plus methylene blue is an interesting combination that was studied before the pandemic on coronaviruses in blood samples, and showed that the combination of all three had a significant impact in eradicating these coronaviruses, not the one that's potentially going around now, or whatever the mutated virus is at the moment, but the but previous coronaviruses that we've known about for centuries, basically. So, but anyway, so that's UVC. But with red light's a higher nanometer, usually somewhere around 680 nanometers, 660 nanometers. And so what I think is happening with red light, Matt, is that red light is also a stimulator of cytochrome oxidase. It's also revving up the same processes that methylene blue is also revving up at the same time. So, and I wonder if there's a synergy between the light and the methylene blue because of the color. And as a result of that, having a synergistic effect on your electron transport chain. We're not sure exactly, but what I think is happening is that you're having an upregulation of energy production that you can't get with either of them on their own. So red light, what is it going to do? It's going to increase nitric oxide as well. It's going to help blood. It's going to help with blood vessel dilation. So you're going to get more blood to the particular area, more oxygen to the particular area that you're shining the light. And then you have methylene blue that's now taking the place of oxygen, supplementing additional with energy production, helping with cytochrome oxidase, helping with antioxidant capacity. So I think it's a synergistic tool for energy production is what it comes down to. And I've had a lot of experience, myself doing this, and like my team at the Troscriptions company, we've also done this internally, and we do seem to see a significant energy bump when you do the combination together. And this is when our users have been showing as well. And so we get a lot of feedback from our users. We call them the Smurfs, of course, right? Because of the blue. And we get a lot of feedback from them. Like, yeah, I got combined methylene blue with my red light, and then I went for a run, or then I went to the gym, or then I took my test, or I decided that I was going to go meditate for 3 hours in the desert without anybody around. Or I mean, it's interesting because you have, if you're meditating, of course, too, you're also creating a different kind of energetic construct for your brain as well. And so we have these, it's kind of crazy, like these longtime meditators that are using our products and having like these existential spiritual experiences using it. It's very cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was resistant for so long, and I think you kind of convinced me or talked me into hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And lately I've been playing a lot with rectal insufflation with ozone, which I was really resistant to, probably more than anything. And I'd done tons of coffee enemas, but I didn't know the power of the ozone gas enemas, so it wasn't up the butt.
That was the problem. It was it was the ozone part. The suppositories and rectal going in the butt is a very great way for delivery of a lot of different types of things. Sure.
Yeah, I've heard anywhere 90 to 95% as effective as IVs, like intravenous.
Right. It's the same thing because you're not getting the digestion, the processes that happen in the liver to either activate, inactivate, or not change the compound. But most of the time, the bioavailability of our compounds goes down dramatically. So one of your favorite supplements, NAC, for example, I know you talk about that a lot, but that particular supplement, it's about 10% bioavailable. So you, on most supplements that you take, they're averaging somewhere between 10 and 15% bioavailability is really common, actually. So that's one of the reasons, again, why suppositories and rectal administration could be so powerful.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I was bringing that up because it seems like those things are a synergizer for everything you're doing in life. So is methylene blue. Yeah. Methylene blue, ozone, and hyperbaric. Like that's a powerful trio, right?
Oh yeah, I've been using it a lot in clinical practice, but I use it in various ways. I mean, from my perspective, I use ozone really for its detoxification capacity in the gut. Ozone O3, and I'm sure you've spoken about this on podcasts before, is a great anti-infective. It's also a great anti-inflammatory and immune system upregulator. And so it's really, what's nice about ozone is you can target particular areas. And so an ozone insufflation is one of those ways. And so oftentimes, and if I have clients that have a lot of ongoing inflammation, oxidative stress, we can use supportive mitochondrial supplements like methylene blue, and at the same time hyperoxygenate them so they can make energy more effectively. We can use it as an anti-infective. We can use hyperbaric therapy as an immune system enhancer. And actually, what probably the most important thing on some level that hyperbaric therapy does, it just increases flow. It increases blood flow into tissue, and it increases lymphatic flow out. And that's because of the pressure that's being put on the body as a result of being in the chamber. So that pressure is like a massage or exercise for your blood vessels of all different sizes and your lymphatic vessels of all different sizes. And so as a result of that flow, you're going to get more flow into tissue. So you're going to maybe make more energy, and you're going to have more waste products of energy metabolism. You're going to kill more bugs if you have bugs around. But then you have lymphatic flow, which helps get rid of all that stuff, but you still need to be able to detox well. And so ozone is great for that. And methylene blue is great on both ends of that to help with the whole process. And so I have friends of mine that are in the chronic infection space that use a lot of methylene blue for chronic infections. I think is it Bartonella, I think, is the one that's most commonly been studied using methylene blue. Now, higher doses than when we have in our troche. Our troche is specifically for nootropic and mitochondrial support, but you can do your own research and you can see that there's a lot of work that's been done on methylene blue for chronic infection. And there's a lot of benefits that you can have, and especially in combination with something like hyperbaric therapy and also with ozone. But it's always important that looking at that foundational stuff is really important. I don't like to get ahead of myself with my clients if I'm working with them, in the sense that if they can't, ozone's not going to be the cure-all. In the sense, if you really have a toxic gut, you need to be working on other ways of optimizing as well, just like cellular foundational stuff too. So vitamins, minerals, nutrients. Are you lead toxic? Are you mercury toxic? Are you able to make energy effectively already? If you can't, and we throw a whole bunch of oxygen at you, or even a whole bunch of methylene blue, it might be a problem. And I've certainly seen this before. And this is what we were discussing before. You put somebody in a chamber, you give them methylene blue, you give them ozone up the butt. If they feel like shit afterwards, you know that there's some work to do, right? So, but I don't like it to be diagnostic in the sense of, let's try to get people at a place where they're going to benefit most from being in the chamber. So that's my goal, if I can. But certainly there are a lot of ozone purists out there. They think that ozone can fix everything. There are a lot of hyperbaric purists out there that think hyperbaric therapy can fix everything. And I'm not sure if there's a lot of methylene blue purists out there, but there's probably one. And if people are interested, they should listen to a guy. His name is Dr. Francisco Gonzalez Lima. And he is a researcher down, I think it's at UT Austin in Texas. And he's a good guy for your podcast at some point. If you really want to dig in, he's done a lot of research on methylene blue and cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's and models of that. And what he actually proposes is that Alzheimer's is not, it's about amyloid plaques and all that stuff is certainly there. But what really is at the heart of it is a blood flow issue. And that's what makes the brain deteriorate over time. And so using methylene blue as an enhancement to get energy production in areas that are getting lower blood flow could potentially reverse or mitigate or prevent some of these things that we're seeing. Now, does it help with the circulation and the eradication of amyloid plaques and tangles? That's an open question. There's some indication that hyperbaric therapy might be helpful in that capacity, and I think that's has to do with flow in general. But with methylene blue, certainly he's one of the most prominent researchers out there looking at how low dose methylene blue, actually not high dose. I mean, what's been studied is an activated form of methylene blue at 8 milligrams, which is something you can't get very easily. It's called leucomethylene blue. It's methylene blue without the coloring. So, and it's interesting because that's the reason why methylene blue came out of favor, really, is that people didn't like when their urine or their other areas turned blue at higher doses. So, but anyway, they did a study looking at this 8 milligrams of an activated form of methylene blue, and showed significant benefit on cognition and memory and retrieval and things like that. So that's why we use the 16 milligram dosage for the troches that we have.
Sounds like a new VIP product. No.
Well, you talked about there's lots of interesting things. I could go there. No, it's okay. Go ahead. Your turn.
Is it accurate to say, like with the dosing, like from what you've read in the research on methylene blue, that like low doses, like 8 to 16 is more for like health optimization, mitochondrial enhancement, and then high dosing, like I think I'm reading this book, like is it hundreds of milligrams for like using for pathogens and stuff?
Yeah, typically it's higher dosing. I think like the lowest dosing I've seen for Bartonella is about 60 milligrams a day, broken up in divided doses. And so you're looking at higher doses typically for viral, bacterial, and fungal infections. Yes.
Okay. I wonder if that would go down if they're using like light with it and stuff.
Right. I was about to say, but if you're doing other things at the same time, could it still have a significant benefit? It's certainly possible. We didn't develop our product specifically to treat those kinds of things, but I know in clinical practice, I have practitioners that I work with that are using our troches or other methylene blue compounds or companies that at higher doses and having good effects. So I think the key for me, Matt, and this is what I came back down, this is what actually took so long for us to develop our first products. The reason is that it's really difficult to find a good source of pharmaceutical methylene blue, pharmaceutical grade methylene blue. And we tested our products after we got the source as well. And we test every batch that we have to make sure it's pharmaceutical grade. And I think that's really where I've been able to use it in my clinical practice, is because I feel like I know where it's coming from. The challenge with a lot of methylene blue, even if it says it's USP or pharmaceutical grade, is it's still contaminated. And the contaminations are typically heavy metals. And you don't want those in your body if you don't need them. and you don't typically need them. And so oftentimes the most contaminated methylene blue products are going to be your fish tank cleaners. And so that's where most people have heard of methylene blue, if they're not medical, is they've heard about it in fish tank cleaners. But those have tons of heavy metals and things like that. So we're always very clear that our product is pharmaceutical grade methylene blue. That's not only pharmaceutical grade, but also tested afterwards. So we test all our products after they're made. Not only just the raw ingredients, but after they're made, we test them for everything. We test them for any contamination. I know you do this with your products too, Matt. Like you look at infections, mold, all that kind of stuff. But you're also looking for heavy metals as well, and contaminations that may have happened along the process. Some of the things I know you make, like the Shilajit, for example, I know you have to be very careful with something like that, just kind of where it's coming from and sourcing and things like that. So we're very, very clear and very emphatic that our stuff is as clean as you can get, despite it having something called PEG in it as well, which is the delivery mechanism, which I know a lot of your users have questions about, which I'm happy to answer as well.
Yeah, that's perfect. Let's jump into that. And by the way, Scott, how much more time do you have? Like 15, 20 minutes or just...
I have, let's see how much more time. I have another 30 minutes. We're good.
Okay,
minutes.
Cool.
35 minutes. Yeah.
Just keeping a note here. Yeah, let's jump into some of these questions. We have quite a few, and people freak out about the PEG. I used to be a purist, like trying to avoid anything, carrageenan or magnesium stearate, and I think a lot of these things are overblown. That's my personal belief. I think it's kind of like an orthorexia with supplements. Right. And I think the dose makes the toxin. People forget that idea, but
oh, I'm 100% with you. I mean, so troches are made, they need a binder. The idea is that you have all these ingredients and they have to be suspended in something so that it dissolves in your mouth. And so we decided on polyethylene glycol, which is PEG for short, because it's been well known and well used and quite safe in oral administration at low doses for decades. And there's a lot of concerns about it, and I completely understand it. But when you're using an oral form of polyethylene glycol, it's not systemically absorbed. That means it never comes out of your gut. You poop it out. Okay. And it's also in very, very small amounts. Okay. So sometimes polyethylene glycol gets confused with propylene glycol, which is antifreeze. Okay. So we are not using antifreeze in our compound. We are not using propylene glycol. Okay. And other people get worried about PEG for other reasons, because there are other products that are not orally administered, and there's lots of these kinds of things, but vaccines are one of them. And then people are worried because there are sometimes can be PEG in those kinds of products. When you're injecting something, it's very different than when your gut is being subject to it. Okay. It's a very different inflammatory reaction potentially. And so if you are worried about PEG that way, that's a different story in general. But oral PEG, oral polyethylene glycol, is very safe. It's generally regarded as safe. It's a GRAS food as well. And so it has that designation. And so we felt very comfortable using it. However, we're always looking for alternatives. In fact, I would bring that as a question to your audience. If you have anything else that you think could be used in a troche to be delivered in the way that we'd like to do it, we're all ears. We've tried a couple other things. We've tried something that was coconut based. We tried an additional compound. I can't remember what exactly was in it. But the challenge also is that we like for our products to be dissolved over 15 to 30 minutes. We don't want something that's going to be absorbed immediately, typically. We like something that's more slow absorbed because there's only so much that can get absorbed at one time. So you want it to be done over a slower period of time rather than just being over 2 or 3 minutes. The other issue is the melting point, is how heat resistant the product is going to be. So the shelf life extends. Now, this time of year, it's not a problem in Colorado and in northern latitudes, but if you live at the equator or if you're in the south, you want something that's going to be at least not going to melt instantaneously when it hits the sunlight, or you leave it in your car, for example, for 5 minutes on a 100-degree day or something like that. So we use the polyethylene glycol for those reasons. So I understand the concern, but I really don't feel that there is a concern at all because of the reasons I mentioned. So to sum up, it's not propylene glycol. We're not giving you antifreeze. It's orally absorbed, but it's not systemically absorbed, which means it's not getting outside of your gut lumens. So it never becomes part of you. It's always inside your gut and you poop it out. And it's a very low dose as well, just there to help bind the troche together so that the melting point stays higher and that the ingredients are suspended and it's slowly released over those 15 to 30 minutes. And you feel the effect and you get the bulk of the effect. You don't lose a lot of it because of a fast melting troche that would make it so that it wouldn't absorb in your gut, in your mucosal lining as well.
That makes sense. Yeah. Maybe on the supplement facts, you could take away PEG because it's such a small difference between polyethylene and propylene. Both starts with P, both ends in E.
It's just like what fits on the label, right? But we actually have discussed that. For our next run, we're probably going to be typing the whole thing out so people know it's polyethylene.
And I forgot to mention Trocalm. I almost like this better than just blue, but I take both. But you guys just released recently, I think it was in the last month, these relaxing buccal troches, and it's was it GABA, CBD, CBG, and kava, and it's nicotinyl GABA, which is cool. And I've been just loving this. Like I actually take one before my interviews, a quarter, and I definitely feel a nice calming effect, and it's grounding. That's the main thing I get from it. Super grounding.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, I think for the context is that we are a company that makes buccal troches or buccal troches. I like to say buccal. I don't know why. It reminds me of something but buccal troches. So they go in your mouth, they dissolve, but they're all addressing these bottlenecks that we all face on the path to optimizing our health. And our mission, actually, it's funny. So Dr. Ted, he's a very interesting guy, and he likes to say that what we're doing at Troscriptions is democratizing enlightenment. And really what that means is ending suffering in ourselves and others, knowing that really there is no other, right? We're all connected in various ways. So that's the basics of it. And so we suffer so much because of anxiety, stress, and our performance suffers as a result of that. And I see this in my kids. They're young, and I see them suffering with these loops that we all get into, and they just get worse as we get older, about thinking about what's going to happen in the future, and then getting nostalgic about what happened in the past, or getting anxious about what happened in the past. And so one way you can stop that cycle is by taking something that relaxes you. Now, of course, that's not the only way you should be potentially addressing things that make you anxious and stressed and things like that. There's lots of other strategies, This particular strategy, Trocom, was developed so that you have an on-demand way of just turning down the dial a little bit. So if you're at 11 and you take a quarter, you can go down to 6. Or if you're at 11 and you take a full, you can go down to 2. And that's the idea. So you can dial that knob or dial it down depending on what you need. And so that's, again, we have the titratable troches that come in the squares that can be broken up into quarters. 1 quarter is typically really great for anxiousness related to performance. So like a podcast, for example, if you're having some anxiety related to that, or if you're like a speaking gig or a lecture. So if I'm up in front of a lot of people, a quarter is great because that just takes the edge off. And I think we all realize this, but we forget that when we're really stressed, our frontal lobe, our executive function actually shuts off and we just go into fight or flight mode. And so that's why you can't find your words. That's why you have dreams of being naked in the middle of a hall auditorium when you're sleeping, because and all those things are related to that stress response. And so all the stress response wants you to do is to get the hell out of there, right? It's like your fight and flight kind of deal. So if you can become more parasympathetic, you can decrease that stress response. All of a sudden, your performance is going to go up. So we don't call it a nootropic exactly. That's our Just Blue and especially blue cannatine. But it is a performance enhancer in the sense that it'll help you perform better when you're stressed in fight or flight. And then, I mean, there are so many people that have anxiousness and stress, and we just wanted to make something that made it easier for you to tolerate and to address those kinds of things in your life. Because if you're too stressed, then it's hard to deal with your stress. Like I see this in my kids too. Like they're so upset about something, they don't want to take some deep breaths. They don't want to go outside and get some fresh air. They're like, no, there's something sort of, and it's so weird, but it's almost gratifying for some people to live in that stress. And it's not your fault, anybody's fault. It's like, it's human nature to get negative reinforcement for this stress and how that makes you feel, and potentially how others feel around you when you're having that stress. But you can break that cycle, and you can break that cycle in a lot of different ways. And obviously meditation, mindfulness, working on your diet, getting outside, all the things that we all know that are related to some of those pillars that I mentioned before, but also the basic stuff, sleep and hydration and et cetera, getting outside. Those are really important. But you also can use tools like Trocom to help for that targeted need of just taking the notch and turning it down, turning the dial. And so taking the edge off. And so it's been really great for me, personally. And also, we did a lot of testing on this beforehand. Again, all of our ingredients are coming with certifications of analysis and pharmaceutical grade. And we looked at the nicotinal GABA that you mentioned before, because GABA is a neurotransmitter in our brain that helps us calm down. It relaxes the firing of neurons. But GABA taken orally by itself is not, like we talked about bioavailability, but bioavailability of GABA is like 0 when you take it orally by itself, because it doesn't get across the blood-brain barrier very well. And so it's not very helpful outside of that. So if you take it with a nicotinal group, which is a vitamin B3 attached, it actually becomes blood-brain barrier permeable. So it gets across the blood-brain barrier and it works extremely well as helping GABA work better in the brain. And then, of course, you have CBD, which we all know at this point is really great as it's neuroprotective. It helps to relax you. It also helps with the increased release or the increased floating around of this particular compound called anandamide, which is our bliss neurohormone, our neurotransmitter as well. That CBD helps stick around longer. It's part of our endocannabinoid system, which is our body's natural system that produces cannabinoids. They're called endocannabinoids. Anandamide is the most common, although there are others as well. And then you have CBG, which is very interesting. It's cannabidiol. It's a newer endocannabinoid, and it's really got a lot of different effects. It works on the CBD, CB1 and CB2 receptors, but also works on additional receptors that help with temperature regulation, insulin sensitivity, metabolic effects. And so it's relatively new, but it seems to be very synergistic with CBD together as well. And then we have kava, of course. I think you've played around with kava before too, Matt. And kava is GABAergic as well. So it increases GABA in the brain. And it also works as a COX-1 and COX-2 inhibitor. So it helps with pain. It also is a monoamine oxidase B inhibitor. So it helps with serotonin release. Sorry, not serotonin as much as dopamine, release as well. So really interesting stuff. And we combined it together in this fantastic product to really address this bottleneck, which is anxiousness and performance related anxiousness as well. So put aside the alcohol, try something that could be a little more therapeutic. And that's what people are doing. That's what we're seeing users do, is use it as a way to wind down instead of some of the other bad habits that people get into, unfortunately.
That's awesome.
That are legal.
Yeah, I know.
Like alcohol.
Yeah, over the years, I've taken all these things separately, and that's really interesting what you said about oral GABA. But I've supplemented GABA by itself. I think transdermal GABA, taken kava tincture, obviously CBD. But it's really cool that you put them all together in one. And it's definitely a powerful synergy. I love it. And
and it's low dose too. So that's the idea with all our products, is that it's not like you're getting blown by any of these. I mean, for me, if I take CBD at 10 milligrams by itself, I feel like I'm dead. But that's low dose for most people. But for me, I'm very sensitive. But in this product, it's low dose CBD. It's 10 milligrams in the full troche. But you can take a quarter of it, and it's synergizing with the other pieces of it, the ingredients in it, and it still gives you profound effect. I mean, that's the same thing with our other products as well. I mean, if you go back to blue cannatine, for example, which is our nootropic that helps with cognitive performance, it has, how much is it? It's got 5 milligrams of CBD in there. It's got 1 milligram of nicotine, and it has 5 milligrams of methylene blue, and it has 50 milligrams of caffeine. But if you just take a quarter of that, you're taking a quarter of all those doses. And it's a very low dose, but it can be extremely powerful to help you focus and get shit done. And it's actually amazing to me and amazing to our users, really, that you can be taking this little of dosing. 50 milligrams is a quarter cup of coffee. So you're taking in a quarter troche, you're taking an eighth of a cup of coffee. You're taking 0.25 milligrams of nicotine, right? And in a cigarette, you'll have like 6 to 28 milligrams. Nicotine replacement products, you're going to have 4 milligrams. We're giving you 0.25 milligrams, and then you're going to get 5 divided by 4 of both methylene blue and of CBD. So it's very low dose. But it's just the synergistic ways. And we're always looking for synergistic mechanisms of action here. And so that's what we're doing with blue cannatine. That's what we're doing with Just Blue, although Just Blue is really just methylene blue and all its amazing qualities. And then you have kava, CBD, CBG, and nicotyl GABA in Trocom. And really the effect is profound, really profound, Matt. And I'm really excited for this product because mitochondrial health is extremely important. And I think if we can just help people be less anxious about their health and about the world and about whatever else, I mean, we can do a lot to really help a lot of people very, very quickly.
Yeah, it's good timing that you guys released this product now. I think it's just in time. And I remember with your nicotine, the nicotine post, I'm a cigar fan. I think one cigar you said has like 200 to 300 milligrams of nicotine that you get from smoking a cigar. And that's
a lot of nicotine.
It's a fast onset. I've definitely seen like the detox effect and like the nausea effect from that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So whenever you're inhaling something, vaping it or smoking it, it's going to hit you immediately. And that's the other reason why we decided to make troches, is that you have a troche that dissolves over 15 to 30 minutes. So it's a slower release, especially something like nicotine, which is addicting if you especially vape it or smoke it because it's hitting you so quickly. Nicotine has receptors in the brain that are named after it, called the nicotinic receptors. And nicotine floods your brain with neurotransmitters, but especially dopamine, and dopamine being your reward neurotransmitter. So as a result of that reward neurotransmitter hitting you so quickly, that's why it could potentially be so addictive. And then in addition, you have additives in cigarettes and tobacco containing products that enhance the addictive nature of nicotine itself. And there's been plenty of studies to show this. Like, nicotine replacement does not kill people. Nicotine gum, nicotine lozenges, nicotine troches, they can be addictive, but you have to have a lot of them to get there. But it does not the same thing when you're smoking and vaping, because you're getting that instant hit of the nicotine plus all the additives that are in the smoking products.
Yeah. I have a book on tobacco, like the chemical components, and it's like, I think it's almost 1,000 pages. And it's amazing what's in tobacco. Like, it has magnesium, it has B vitamins. There's so many components to it.
It's not all bad either. And that's the thing too. the tobacco plant is actually, could be a very healthy plant. And because it has all those things that you just described in it. But what's happened over the last several hundred years is all the things that make it more addictive have been bred into the plants, so that when you smoke a cigarette, you have a higher chance of getting addicted to it faster, so that the cigarette companies and tobacco companies make more money on you as a product. You're the product of their product.
It's like cannabis too, right? Yeah.
Well, cannabis is interesting because back in the day when I was a kid, I mean, the amount of THC in cannabis was like, I don't know, 1% of what it is now, I guess. So the amount of THC that's been bred into plants is absolutely astronomical. I totally agree with that. Now, THC is an interesting molecule, and I do think that there's some therapeutic value of THC, but I also think there's some significant challenges with it, especially at such high doses. And that comes down to the isolated versions of THC versus its combination with things like CBD, for example, which help temporize the psychoactive component and potentially some of the downsides of THC as well, especially in younger individuals, because we know that there is potential downsides of high THC intake in younger individuals with brain function.
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned it on a previous show I did, but we just watched, it was a new PBS documentary. Oh, here it is, called The Cannabis Question. I think it was released like a couple months ago. It's free on YouTube.
Okay.
On Nova PBS. And it was pretty interesting. And that one doctor in there basically said, like, if you're taking under 100 milligrams of CBD, it almost has no effect. Like, it's not worth it. She's like, you have to get north of 100 milligrams. And it was an interesting hour little special. I enjoyed it on cannabis. But yeah, they were really cautioning against high dose THC, saying it's like jackhammering the cannabinoid receptors.
Yeah. Again, we talked about this before we got online, Matt, but the body's a network, right? It's not, you can't just give it one thing and think that's going to be the answer, or it's oftentimes it's going to have different results than you anticipate. This is like a lot of the studies that were done on vitamins, for example, like on antioxidants, saying they didn't help anybody, is because they never tested to see what people actually needed before they gave them the antioxidants. And they were just giving them sort of blindly, or B vitamins or any other supplement you've heard of that can kill you. It's because they took one supplement. They never tested anybody about what they actually needed, and they started giving things to people. And so when you start battering ramming the receptors with one compound, you're going to cause problems. There's no doubt about it. You're going to downregulate your body's own ability to make cannabinoids, and that's a problem. Now, from my perspective, I mean, I've seen plenty of therapeutic value of less than 100 milligrams of CBD. There is some indication that you need those doses or higher if you're trying to prevent seizures, for sure. Mm-hmm. And the company that's made a drug out of CBD called Epidiolex is a drug that uses those kinds of high doses for seizure prevention, and very effectively, I might add. So there's certainly some indications where I think that kind of dosing would be helpful, but I don't think that all CBD dosing needs to be that low or that high, excuse me. At least from my clinical practice, I've seen therapeutic value at much lower doses.
Yeah, and maybe that's in people, like you said earlier, with lead and mercury and aluminum, and people forget about synergy. And if someone's relatively healthy, you probably need less of a dose to get the same effect, So
that tends to be the case. For most products in general. The less you need, if the more optimized you are. Certainly with our products. Certainly, if you need a quarter of a methylene blue troche and you feel like $1 million, or interestingly, we've had more people taking them before they go to bed at night, Matt, just taking a quarter troche of the just blue, and they're telling me that their dreams are more vivid and they wake up more well rested too, because we forget that sleep is at least during REM sleep, it's a pretty highly metabolic time, and so that's when your blood sugar drops dramatically. So if you've ever measured your blood glucose or done like a continuous blood glucose monitor, your blood sugar will drop during REM because you're utilizing a lot more energy during that time frame. So just interesting. I haven't played around with it too much at night. And so it's something that I've been thinking about doing, but we get very funny things on Instagram about waking up feeling well rested, having a gigantic dump in the morning and feeling amazing afterwards. And, you get all comers on Instagram, but I see how it potentially could therapeutically work at night, for example, when you're using the methylene blue troches, for example, but yes, overall, the more optimized you are, the less compound of a compound you potentially need. And I think it's also important for your listeners to always remember that it's about the body being a network. That diagram you have behind you, we're complex individuals with millions of cellular processes happening every second. And this is something also that's very interesting, that the world around us that we're actually interpreting, we're at least a millisecond, if not more, late to the game, because our body and our brain is processing things, and then we're experiencing things, but there's a delay in that time frame. So it's amazing how fast things work, but we're still like living in a dream world, if you want to think about that way, because we're not actually seeing what's out there in real time. We're seeing a delay. So the complexity of our avatar, our organism is pretty intense. And so it's always important that if anybody tells you that this one thing is going to cure you, one thing is going to kill you, the answer is no. That's just not it, right? There's nuance in the world. And I think it's difficult for people to live in nuance, but nuance is the key. And then working your way through nuance with data and with experience, both individually and for me as a clinician with the people that I work with, that's the way you really can help people and help yourself and that's why we call it the N=1 world, but using not just subjective, but objective data together, and then understanding the body as a network is really key.
That's awesome. Yeah. Frequent guest Adam Bergstrom always says, yes, no, maybe, that phrase. And I like that.
Well, I always say that if somebody tells you that their technology, that their fill in the blank is all you need and that's going to cure everything, run away, because you know that it's nice that they believe that, because I do get that. There's some things out there that do feel universal, like oxygen, for example, like getting more oxygen in the body. That feels more universal, but there is a downside potentially as well. So again, nuance, use your own data, find people that can help you, find resources that can help you, and make decisions and do things step by step. Also, that's the other thing that people get into trouble with, is that they start changing 5 or 6 different things at the same time, and then they don't know what helped them, they don't know what hurt them, etc. So especially in the biohacking world, we find that people like to do 20 different things at the same time. But in the medical clinical world that I live in, I really try to be methodical with people as I can. And then slowly get people to shift things and then try different things to help along the way. So, for example, if I'm going to put somebody in a hyperbaric chamber, I'm not going to give them methylene blue at the same time, the first couple treatments, right? We're going to see how they do with hyperbaric therapy first, and then we're going to start adding in methylene blue and just kind of see what that looks like. And then if they're tracking data, we can track their data, track their sleep, track their glucose, check their heart rate variability. You can track all this kind of stuff and see how that changes depending on when you bring things together, right? So long story short is that, do your own research, but go step by step along the way too.
So you don't have them do rectal ozone in the chamber?
Not yet. I haven't tried that one. After the chamber, sure, yeah, but not during. It depends what kind of chamber you have. But I am bringing more things in there, but I haven't worked on anything in that capacity yet.
I caught I think you saw me in the live. You went live with an athlete woman that you just got a chamber, and she mentioned the Normatec boots, and I was like, that's pretty smart because you can use those not plugged into the wall. I'm like, that's a pretty cool idea to use this.
Yeah, so I have a couple athletes that use the Normatecs in the chamber because they're battery powered. In the milder units that go to 1.3 atmospheres, you don't really have to worry about anything electrical as long as it's not car battery sized electrical in there. I have to make that clear because I don't know what some of your guys are going to do inside the chamber or my clients. I have to tell, I brought in this huge battery pack. I'm like, no.
But if it's 2 and above, you don't want to bring that in.
What's that?
If it's 2 atmospheres or above, you probably don't want to bring the boots in there. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Anything anything above, like below about, or anything deeper than 1.5, I get a little bit more, don't, for the most part, anything electrical, especially something that's going to be more higher powered. Yeah. But in general, like low level light therapy. So I have people bring in lights. I have people bring in supplements, of course. I have people bring in electric stim. So That particular lady used electric stim. She used the Mark Pro device on her ankle and on her Achilles tendon, along with being in the chamber at the same time. We're actually going to be testing methylene blue as well, and see how it works with endurance with a couple of athletes. She hasn't decided yet, but with a couple of athletes, and to see how it does on timing and things like that. Because again, if you're an elite athlete and you get 1% faster on your time, that is gigantic. So for you and me, it probably would be even more gigantic, because we're not running all the time, right? So, but the difference and the gains with when you're an elite athlete, if they get to that 1 to 5% mark, those are huge, as you know. So that's what we're working on with Jordan, and that's what I work out with some of my other athletes as well. So I'm a clinician, is what it comes down to, Matt. And so for me, it's all about doing things methodically, using data, and then trialing things while we're using that data and while we're retesting over time to see how things work. And so I work with clients all over the US. I do testing with them using the health optimization medicine framework. And then we dial in supplements, we dial in diet, we dial in lifestyle, depending on what your goals are and your needs are. And then on top of that, you add in things like hyperbaric therapy, you add in methylene blue, you add in Trocom, you add in blue cannatine, you add lights, you add all different types of modalities, but you got to get your house in order first, get the foundational stuff in order first, I find, to really see the benefit from a lot of this other stuff.
Absolutely. Two quick burning questions. I think indirectly you answered a lot of the questions, but I don't think we covered this one. Should you take the supplements with or without food? Did you say just experiment, or?
It's a good question. It depends on how you're going to take them. If you're going to swallow them instead of use them in the mouth, it's better to do it on an empty stomach, because you'll have faster absorption that way. We have some people that have some of the burning related to the peppermint. I don't recommend using the troches after you eat, because you have more saliva in your mouth, and that's going to give you a higher risk of getting more of that burning sensation. So, but in general, after that, it's more how you feel. So if you feel like extremely hyped up after taking a quarter of methylene blue, then maybe you should eat something before you take it. Right? But if you don't, but if you're feeling more sluggish after you eat because you've had food, then sometimes people will take it after their meal and feel like they get a bit of an energy boost as a result of that as well. So it just kind of depends. It depends.
Okay, awesome.
Trocom is the same thing. Trocom is the same thing.
Okay. Yeah, and they were asking if you could build up a tolerance to Trocom, or can it be addictive?
Yeah, it's a good question. None of the compounds in there have addictive properties at this point. So we don't feel like you can. Kava has been studied, not addictive. Nicotinol GABA has been studied, not addictive. CBD and CBG, same thing. So we don't see any tolerance to these particular ingredients too, which is super interesting. Unlike alcohol and other things that people use for anxiety, or even THC, for example. Doesn't seem to be CBD. There really isn't any evidence that there's a tolerance that comes with CBD or CBG. Kava, the same thing, and nicotinol GABA. So, of course, we don't want you to try, in the sense that we have a box warning about you don't have more than 4 servings per day. But very rarely does anybody go that much anyway, right? So, but yeah, and then for the blue cannatine that has nicotine in there, as long as you're following our directions, we haven't had any reports of anybody having any issues with addiction related to the product itself. And that's because, again, it's slow release and low dose and all those kinds of things.
Right on. Awesome, Scott. Well, yeah, appreciate your time. I know you got to run. And I think this is a great primer for people that maybe have never heard of methylene blue, or if they have, there's some great advanced knowledge that you shared here. I love the light stuff. I could talk about that all day. So yeah, appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom about methylene blue.
It's my pleasure. It's a great compound. And if you guys like, I did write a blog on our website, Troscriptions.com, that is it's well cited and referenced. And so that you can head on over there and do a deeper dive into some of the things that we didn't discuss about methylene blue. And it sounds like you have a book, Matt, that people could read as well if they really want to get into the weeds as well on this amazing compound. But yeah, don't fear the blue. Enjoy it. And it's a great way to health optimize and mitochondrial optimize. And it's always a pleasure to see you and to be with you, Matt. And thank you for your audience for listening. And I look forward to seeing you in person sometime soon when you have your whole lair all set up with all your tech, and we can hang out some more.
Well, I hope you're inspired to dig deeper into the methylene blue subject. I've been playing with it for the last few years. I started with just using it topically and didn't feel anything. And I started taking the clean stuff internally. And that's when I really started to feel the effect. Like I said with my friend Adam of Lifeblood on the previous show, I had a chronic cough like every few minutes, like a dry cough. And just one dose of methylene blue took it away for several days. And I noticed that I had to keep up with it. But whatever I had, it completely knocked it out. And I was talking to a friend the other day, and I said that my strategy would be a combination of wild oregano, and I prefer the capsules, and pharmaceutical grade methylene blue. And I feel like if someone's taking both of those things, then you really can't catch the common cold or the flu or whatever it is that's going around lately. If you'd like to learn more about Scott Sherr and what he's doing on the hyperbaric oxygen therapy side of things, you can go to hyperbaricmedicalsolutions.com. I'll put the link to that below. And he got me on this website called hyperbaricexperts.com. And that was really what sold me on hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I was very skeptical coming from the perspective that most people have chronic iron overload, and the tests that you're doing don't show that. And to me, that copper deficiency iron overload / lipofuscin is why someone would not feel good or feel worse after a round in the chamber. But there's a lot of nuances here. There's mild HBOT, or there's higher pressures, which you're heading more towards the hard chambers. And I think the applications are really endless, especially when you integrate the approach of Morley-Robbins and realize what contributes to oxidative stress, which is largely that lipofuscin thing, which is a combination of iron, polyunsaturated fats, aluminum, and excess estrogen. And I think the synergy between hyperbaric oxygen therapy, if you have access to it or can get your own at-home chamber, and methylene blue is really incredible. Just like the synergy with methylene blue and light therapy, whether it's UV light or red light. I think a lot of people just aren't aware of the tools that we have available and how to properly stack things. And the fact that copper is the ultimate anti-pathogenic mineral, and that most of us are deficient in it. And we're supplementing zinc and ascorbic acid and, worst case, iron, and you're decreasing your mitochondria's ability to utilize oxygen and perform cellular respiration. So methylene blue is like a little cheat or a shortcut that quickly increases your cell's ability to utilize oxygen. It's pretty cool. And then you add ozone to that, and there's really endless stacking that you can do. And I stack it all because I'm crazy like that, but you don't have to. Scott made a great point in the show, that is to start slow. You don't start everything at once, because that can make you feel bad. And if you feel bad, you're less likely to continue down the path. I'll put the link below where you can check out Troscriptions as well. If you use the discount code Blackburn, you save a little bit. And I love all of their products. I think they all have their place. Blue Cannatine is great if you have a long drive ahead of you. And if you have food in your system, even better. I think it really helps motor function and focus with driving. That's my favorite time to use it. And Just Blue is the product I use the most from them. And Trocalm I'll use if I'm feeling a little overwhelmed or just want to bring it down a notch. I'll put the link below to my Telegram channel where I can speak freely and completely uncensored. It's kind of hysterical how many things are effective against COVID. It's almost everything from my research, and a lot of the things that people wouldn't imagine, like tobacco or cannabis. And not recommending you become a stoner or an alcoholic, but certain things in moderation at the right time can be beneficial. And my website is matt-blackburn.com. I have all of my recommended products up there. I'm still obsessed with the ozone machine, the cold plasma, cold quartz ozone machine from Crucial 4. I'm loving the ozonated water, really amazing for the teeth and gums. A lot of people are having dental issues, and I think drinking ozonated water often, swishing with it, is a really smart thing to do. And if you didn't know, I have a private YouTube academy. It's called Mitolife Academy, where I share 4 private videos a month. And you could sign up on 3 different tiers: basic, intermediate, or advanced. And whichever tier you sign up for, you get access to a live Q&A once a month. Usually it's near the end of the month. And on my journey from Colorado back to Idaho, I stopped in Montana and I filmed a video there in the hotel of the mitigation strategies that I use to make sure I get a restful night's sleep and I'm fully recharged for the next day. So that's a basic video that was recently posted up there. And I'll put the link below for that as well. And Mitolife is the brand that I created, and that is the vehicle for the CLF Protocol: calcification, lipofuscin, and fibrosis. And we're slowly getting things back in stock. For a while, most of the products were out. The probiotic recently came back in stock, as well as Panacea. That's purified Shilajit resin tablets that we import from Russia. And that's my favorite supplement. If there was only one that I took, it would be that one. It has magnesium, calcium, potassium, trace minerals, and fulvic acid. And very simply, I look at Shilajit as a heavy metal chelator, a supreme mineral balancer, a ceruloplasmin source, so it doesn't only contain copper, it contains copper in its bioactive form, which is a protein called ceruloplasmin. That's really unique. And it's a chelator of excess iron. It won't over-chelate iron, but if you have too much of it, it will bring it down over time. And traditionally, Shilajit was consumed with raw milk. And so those two are made for each other. So whenever I have a tall glass of raw milk, I'll take 5 tablets. And the question I get quite often, can I take this while pregnant or breastfeeding? I'm not a doctor, so I can't give medical advice. I could say if I was a woman that was in that situation, I would take really small doses if I wasn't on it before, and I wouldn't try to detox or to really shift a lot of things until I was through the breastfeeding or the pregnancy. So thank you guys for your patience with having a week off. I feel like I needed that. It was a huge journey through Wyoming and Montana. It was definitely the scariest drive of my life with the trailer and 2 cats by myself. It was like a movie driving through slushy gas stations and ice sheets. I'm really grateful that I drive a 4-wheel diesel truck because that thing's a beast. I have some really exciting shows lined up for you guys. Going to be interviewing the focused life force energy people. That's a really interesting technology that raises the consciousness of your property. And then I'm having my friend Mandy Flanders back on the show to talk about the nervous system and chronic dysregulation and how to come back into balance. And then Dr. Sherr, that created this really wild technology called the Troche that allows you to access the magnetic side of the scalar field. And he'll break down exactly what that means. And then I'm finally having a show on holistic dental health with Dr. Seb. Really excited for that one. So Happy New Year, as Dr. Scott and the Troscriptions team would say. New year, new blue. I'm really excited to connect a lot more dots with you guys this year, and let's keep diving deeper into alternative health. See you guys next week. Stay supercharged.